Hi, this is Steve, aka @AllAnthar on Twitter, and here are some more of my gaming vexes. Hello, and welcome to another of my gaming vexes. When I came back into the hobby in 2018, after 16 years in the deep freeze, TM, one of the phrases I heard bandied about a lot was the OSR, or Old School Renaissance, and I had absolutely no clue what it meant. Before I was encased in Carbonite in 2002, role-playing was just role-playing. There was no old, new, or any other school that I was aware of at least. I must admit that on coming back I did spend some time trying to understand what old school was meant to be, but after listening to a number of podcasts and reading some blog posts and being none the wiser, I gave it all up as a bad job and decided to focus on just playing. That was, however, until recently when the question of which school is better came up again, hence this episode. In terms of format, we've gone for something a bit different this time, as you'll hear. Also, if you're listening in the week after the episode is released into the wild, you'll have the chance to vote for which school's arguments swayed you the most, through a poll on Twitter. If you're listening at some point in our increasingly dystopian future, however, I'll make sure I cover the results in the next episode, to save you having to trawl through old Twitter threads. As bonus content, the ever-creative Kay Elling went to the trouble of creating what I believe the kids call a rap to support her case. You can hear Kay in full-on ironic mode at the end of the episode, with her words rather inexplicably set to a backing track by me. Sorry, Kay. And with that, get ready. So, thanks very much, everybody, for joining. This is the most we've had on one podcast for ever, really, on this one. And so this is going to be a little bit of new ground, I think, for us. So whereas I've talked about the sort of the atmosphere of the podcast before, you know, whereas a podcast like, I don't know, just click an example out there, Frankenstein's RPG, is like the Today programme or PM on Radio 4. I mean, we've certainly, you know, we've gone for the shipping forecast style of things. So doing sort of, you know, nice mug of cocoa, sit down and have a snooze. But on this one, we're going to go for a little bit more edge. So still, you know, friendly and jovial, but with an undercurrent of incipient menace. So it's a bit more like Women's Hour is what I'm thinking of, really, as far as that goes. With that in mind, let's meet our, and I've got to make the joke, master debaters. First up, Team Old School. Do you guys want to introduce yourself?
Hello, David Patterson, Old School, Hull University, and on Twitter @Dave Patters.
Neil H, aka Thermal Satsuma, Old School Gamer, currently reading Tunnels and Trolls.
So to distinguish myself from Neil H, I'm like the Spice Girls, really. I'm Neil B, he's Neil H. Anyway, so Old Scouser RPing on Twitter. There you go.
So you're Old Spice, is that what you're saying?
I've been called that before, along with lots of other things.
Hi, Fabio here. I'm a 60-year-old gamer. I have to say 60. I think I'm the oldest person, so you can guess which school I'm in. Middlesex University, been playing role-playing games since the 70s.
All my own teeth.
And Team New School.
I'm Doc, Edinburgh University. Also started in the 70s, though I'm a spring chicken, only being 52. Very much looking forward to this. Thank you.
I thought you were older than 52.
Oh, it might be. I don't know. I lost track. Do you want me to do the maths on air? It's just embarrassing. Well, let me work it out.
You're the same age as
I'm
me,
53. I'm 53. Oh, I'm very old.
Right.
Can I switch sides?
If you like.
Hi, I'm Kay Elling, Leeds Metropolitan University, Bradford University, now Teesside University. All of the universities, so I'm the academic here on the team, and I'm therefore incredibly new school. You can find me on Twitter at The initial K _0.
I'm Kat. I'm new school. I'm on Twitter at Mere for Beer. University. I used to be a photographer.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm new school today for 2 reasons. One is domestic harmony, and the other one is I have far too much hair to be old school. You can find me on.
Puts into the quick right there.
You can find me on Twitter at Zos93.
You Renaissance fanboy.
Yeah. I think Doc's lack of hair counteracts your excess of hair.
Lustrous locks.
So you're team hair, right, as well as team new school. Okay,
Exactly.
with the honourable exception of Doc.
I don't think we need to keep going on about this. I think it's fine.
Draw attention to it. And as moderator, as a co-moderator on this very serious, as you'll hear, debate, I'm joined by Rick, who will be for this episode referred to as Arbiter Rick, because we're nothing if not entirely original about these.
Oh, completely. Yeah.
Rick, would you like to introduce yourself and also the rules of engagement for this serious debate?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'm Rick, Scumbag College. And I'm at Vintillers on Twitter. And right, so Arbiter, so just to go through the rules for this, the rules of engagement, perhaps we should say. Basic rules, just remember, no biting, no gouging, no kicking under the table. Tolkien is better than Morgoth. And also, goes for short controversy. And also, just remember, the idea is, while we're talking, what's good about your school? And why is it the better playing style? So, keep it positive. Let's rock.
And so in terms of the format then, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have each team member have 3 minutes to speak, and they're going to alternate with the opposing team. Midway through, whilst the debaters suck on an orange and get a quick rub down, Arbiter Rick and I will interview the teams to see how it's going for them. And at the end, we'll have closing comments from each team as to why their school is the best. And then once the podcast is released, I'll open a poll on Twitter for listeners or other appalled bystanders to judge the outcome. So we're going for a people's vote. So again, in the spirit of modern day politics, that's just that it's the populist way it goes. So I think without any questions, any concerns, any safety issues before we get started.
Well, one thing I could say, just remember, check out the video playlist in the show notes if you're interested, if you've been affected by any of the issues that have been raised in this podcast. Have a look at that. So there's a few, if you're interested in some of the stuff that's been said or some of the games, then have a look at that. There'll be a few things in the show notes.
Excellent. And just one more thing to add to the rules, sorry. So I don't want any languorous limb movements. I'm looking at you, Benson and Cowie. So to put off the opposition, don't want any of that. So, right.
Can I just confirm? Are we really no gouging at all?
It's frowned on.
Okay.
What about sick yet accurate burns? Surely those are allowed.
Yes, all that stuff.
Big swine.
Okay, all right. So, Team Old School, has one of you guys got a D20? Because we need to roll to see who's going to go first.
What? An old-fashioned D20, like
like a D20 you can actually roll.
Not an online roller.
Is it numbered 0 to 9 twice? That's the question, though.
No, it's got 20. I can roll it.
You
Like a 16.
16. Okay, so we'll have a D20 from Team New School.
A D20? I was doing a dice pool. I got 3 successes.
And then you panicked.
You don't get to add your initiative modifier to this.
You got a consequence. Yes, but
so we can go first, but after the old school people.
You roll D20. Tell me what number you get, and I'll tell you.
For goodness sake, you're such a trad gamer. 16. Happy?
16.
Wow.
It's a roll off. It's proper.
Delay your action, somebody.
Let me go
5.
at the same time.
5. Come on then.
10.
10. Okay, right. So, Team Old School, you get to choose. Do you want to go first or do you want to go second?
Well, Neil, surely you're our
I think
captain.
we'll go first.
Okay. All right. And so, who amongst you is going to speak first? Who's going to be first into the shark tank?
Like literally everybody who's ever on this podcast, I was sort of vaguely hoping Kay would start because she'd have the most prep. But maybe we save her towards the end. What do you think, Kay? Strategy, isn't it?
I've got some notes, but I don't have like full-on charts or anything because that would be too old school. So.
Good thinking. Nice point. Well, look, honestly, why don't you start, and that can cover up the fact that I've not really thought about it.
All right, Kay, are you ready to start in that instance?
I am ready to start.
Contenders, ready! Gladiators, ready!
So, yes. Hi, I'm Kay, and welcome to this lecture on old school versus new school. I hope everyone's done their homework and you've done the prepared reading that we all asked for. So I've got 2 minutes and 46 seconds now to talk about this. So I think the point that I really want to make about new school is that it is just generally very flexible in ways that old school perhaps is not. And I think it's that openness and flexibility that gives new school that appeal for possibly a wider audience, possibly a little bit more inclusive, generally speaking. I know that OSR is the way that I see old school role playing is very much as an equivalent of hard mode in video games, like in Dark Souls or Bloodborne. And there's an enormous amount of jeopardy for the player in old school. And in fact, jeopardy is almost the entire point. And I feel that the challenge and thrill for old school comes from throwing oneself into the action, sort of come what may. Now, that doesn't mean that new school has no jeopardy. It's just that I think it has a wider variety of jeopardy, and it doesn't necessarily have to have it full on all the time. So that jeopardy could come from social stats or social interactions, or it could come from a wider political or ethical element, and just give you a real sort of diverse sense of gameplay that you might not necessarily get with the old school style. Obviously, new school is heavily associated with narrative gameplay, opting for more drama or longer, more intricate sort of iterations of stories or story elements, and lots of character development. I should say that, yes, that probably does include failing forward. I think failing forward is a new school thing. Oh, no, that's it. I've just handed the team an easy win there.
Dave's just thrown his hands up in horror on the video.
But I think the new school is generally more interested in the wider options for cinematic storytelling and exploration. And I've tried to kind of funnel this down, also puns, because funnels are obviously an old school thing and you don't get them in new school, into 3 Fs, 3 F words, and they're all family friendly, so that's okay. The first one is flexible, the second one is forgiving, and the third one is fun. So I realise I've got 41 seconds to fill, and I had in fact prepared a really awful, just in case, in with the youths rap if we needed to go down to a rap battle later on, but I'm going to save that just in case there is any kind of time later on. So so essentially what I'm trying to say is new school is way more flexible than old school. It's way more forgiving of player foibles and player mess ups. There's another F word that I'm not using there. And that because of that, it can be more fun to a wider variety of people. Thank you very much. There's further reading in the library should you wish to do it. My office hours are Tuesdays 2 till 4.
Oh my word. Masterclass. Brilliant. Well done, Kay. And have you really got a rap thing in there later on?
I do have 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got five kind of lines based on the classic, my old school, new school is great and old school is crap kind of lines. So some rhyming stuff if you really want it, but it's so cringe that we can only do it ironically.
I think we definitely do want that right at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much, Kay. So I think you certainly made the opening argument there for the new school is a more pleasurable play experience than old school. So with that in mind, then, old school now have got the option to sort of obviously to make their own case, but also to politely and sensibly rebut some of the points that you might make in their next 3 minutes. So over to Team Old School. Who's going to be first into the pit?
Oh, I'm happy to reply to that.
Right.
I think them's fighting words.
Neil H., your 3 minutes are going to start now.
Okay. Well, for me, old school role playing is like Vietnam. You don't know, man. You weren't there. So this is the sensibility that we started with back in the 70s. Some of I've been doing a bit of reading about what the old school Renaissance is, and I think that they're missing the point somewhat. One thing that Kat was saying, that the new school is flexible and fun. I've got a quote from the first edition of Tunnels and Trolls rules from 1975. This is Ken St. Andra. So his general rules for dungeon designers: number 1, let your imagination go wild. You can do anything you want to. 2, put in a lot of stuff. No one likes to mess around in a dull dungeon. 3, use as much humor as you can, but don't be silly or juvenile. And he goes on. But basically that old school sensibility was, you've got a set of rules, but you can build on them. You can do what you want. You can make it fun. You can give a challenge. He says, every trap or spell should have some way of being avoided, nullified, or overcome. So that there's never going to kill you in one shot, unless that's the sort of game you want. If you want to do that, fine. But he says it's definitely not fair to teleport everybody who enters your solar room into the heart of the sun. There should be a way out. So building on those rules, you always know what the risks are when you go into a dungeon. And as has been said before, you let the dice fall where they may. You know the risk, you take the chance, and yeah, you might die, but that's part of the fun of the game. That's the challenge, because if you might die, you might also live. You might come out with a fistful of gold and down the tavern to tell your stories and relive the adventure. So I'd say, like, the story is something that's an emergent property of the rules. It's not something that's imposed beforehand. You're not trying to write a novel and then get people to play the lines. It just happens as it does. And those are the sort of stories that we remember, the times that we fought a battle and came through by the skin of our teeth, or maybe died heroic deaths, or even died miserable deaths. But that's the stories that we remember. That's the true old school, is that we were the grognards in the trenches, in the dungeons, or on the rusty spaceships, and we survived. We lived to tell the tale. So that's it. I think the old school already was flexible, maybe not forgiving, but it certainly was fun. And I've got 10 seconds left from that.
That's all right. That's brilliant. Okay. Thanks, Neil. That was, really interesting. So it seems as though from the first two debaters on both sides, so on the one side, it seems to be that from old school that the framework is very, very loose and actually enables a lot of creativity. In reality, it may be that lack of framework and rules means that people tend to go down a very transactional route, possibly. So it's more about just killing stuff and stealing their gear. Whereas I think from the new school, they're sort of saying, Kay seemed to be saying that it was a lot of the broader storytelling elements are actually built into the mechanics. So actually it's there and it's built in terms of social threat, etc., etc. Whereas it's more inferred than in the old school side of things. So that's what I took, which is probably way off the mark, but that's what I heard anyway. Okay, so that's really interesting. Thank you. So we're going back to team new school now. So we're going to have one more new school, one more old school, then we're going to take a bit of a break and just get a sense of, from the teams, we're going to go into our respective green rooms and we're going to think about, okay, what does that mean for the next part of the discussion? Who's the next new school voice?
I believe it's me, having had a whole 6 minutes to think about exactly what I'm going to say, having come in at the last minute. So this will be interesting.
Okay, all right. So this is the last new school before the position before the break in that case. So here we go.
Well, thanks, Neil, for giving us a really good example of old school and sort of things that can go on with it. You talk a lot about dungeons and a lot about monsters and battles that you've run away from or battles that you've died heroically or otherwise in. And I think that is one of the good things about old school. But what new school offers is it offers all that plus much more. There's so much more you can do in new school games than kill monsters and take their stuff. A lot of new school games are, I would call them more collaborative, because the rules for GMs that Neil came up with, they sound quite sort of combative. They sound like GM versus player. Whereas in new school, it's very much about building a story together. I'll take as an example a new school game, although it was published in the 80s, we'll call it a new school game, and that's Quest Worlds, was Hero Quest. I've played that numerous times, and in Hero Quest, often when a character death is required, then it's talked about amongst the players, including the characters themselves. And, the death has to happen for a reason. It has to be important to the story. It's not just something that comes up because somebody rolls a 1 or whatever the equivalent is of a bad roll. So in new school stories, you can explore much more than just surviving. You can, characters can become disabled for a story reason. You can have relationships for story reasons. You can explore much more territory than just being able to hit something. And that for me is one of the joys of new school. I enjoy the dungeon crawl as much as any gamer, but sometimes you want something a bit more. Sometimes you need to be able to just explore other kind of areas of life. And to be able to do that within a game is a great way of doing it, because there are situations that you come across in life that you think, well, how am I going to resolve this? And sometimes if you've resolved it maybe before in the game, you think back on the time that it was resolved in the game and how you felt about it then, and that can actually help you, I think, in certain situations. It's almost like, when you're in a stressful situation, you think, what would my character do? And that's in an old school game. What would my character do? Well, my character would chop the head off the orc and take their stuff. In a new school game, they may have experienced something similar to the situation that you're in currently, and that for me is great. So that's my view on a new school, anyway.
So you're saying that essentially by playing in a new school format means you're less likely to hit people in real life? Is that what we're saying?
Well, it depends if they're old school fans or not, but it's
it's good to know. That's good to know. Over to old school. So who's going to be the next old school person to speak, and the one just before the break? Who's going for this one? Neil, old Scouser role playing. I think we know where he sits on things. So, but let's see. Okay, so Neil, over to you. Your 3 minutes starts now.
Okay, so I think one of the things we've missed is a definition of old school, and I guess then a definition of new school. And to me, old school is stuff that kind of 80s, maybe early 90s, stuff before really like Vampire the Masquerade, which I think was like the first, I don't know, the first big story game, I guess. It's not, old school's not just D&D clones, and I think there's a lot of everyone's talking about it's all about cutting down orcs in dungeons and stuff, and there's loads of old school games. You go into the shelves, games of Liverpool, and there'd be all kinds of games, all the Chaosium stuff. Call of Cthulhu is an old school game. It wasn't about cutting down orcs, investigative, story driven. And to me, it also includes the definition of old school. Also includes games that were created more recently that kind of mimic that feel or the rules. So things like Against the Dark Master, our class is old school in its certainly mechanics and sensibility. The other thing for me, old school, was if it was something you could buy in a box in Games of Liverpool, and is old school. In terms of the characteristics of an old school game, I think they're not so concerned with balance. They can be deadly, and it's something Neil touched on. But the buzz of surviving a dungeon that's deadly is it's great, and it's far more heroic than these 5e bullies who just know that they know they're never going to lose, so they just go in and stomp on orc heads, and they call themselves heroes. That's not heroes. That's just bullies. So, and I also think definition of fun is important. Like my fun might be different to somebody else's fun. I think that's a really important thing. Other things about old school games, though, they tend not to have these modern fripperies, narrative nonsense, storytelling as a built into the game. As Neil said, the story comes out of play. And they feel more like games, like new school is trying to be some arty-farty, some huge narrative endeavor where we're all playing part and whatever. I'd say bollocks to that. It's a game. Let's roll some dice and have some fun. I think the other things that often go with old school, they tend to be more open in terms of their style of play, more sandboxy. The mechanics are often a bit weird and clunky, different subsystems and weird stuff. That's probably about it, I think.
Concise, to the point, articulate as always. So we're going to take a little break here and say, we're going to just, as you you make your way to your separate green rooms and for your rub down and your orange slice. So, Arbiter Rick, any thoughts on what you've heard so far before we actually talk to the two teams? So what do you think of the relative strengths or otherwise of the arguments being made so far?
It's all pretty persuasive so far, I have to say. I think one of the things that seems to be coming out is the idea of, well, what's fun and what isn't, but also the idea of maybe sort of new school being a little more inclusive, and also the, as you'd expect, the emphasis on narrative. There's some interesting things about, perhaps we could talk about things to do with how narrative is actually created, because narrative in some games can come out of, let's say it comes out of particular activities. Character also is expressed in particular activities. So that's something perhaps we could explore. And also the definition of what is old school and what is new school, whether it's style or whether it's actual time. Neil said before pre-vampire. That's an interesting suggestion about whether it's time or whether it's attitude for old school and new school. But there's some good stuff so far. Yeah.
So the arguments that have been made so far, there's obviously talk about the fact that there's availability for having this stuff built into the game. But sometimes, in my experience, and I'm even-handed here. I know they're old school, new school. I think sometimes those mechanics can get in the way in a game. So I think that probably the team new school may need to think about how they sell what's the benefit of those extra pages in the rule book, and what does that add? And on the old school side, I think yes, there's a lot of space there because the rules don't take up that space, but I think there's also a requirement for a very strong social contract between the GM and the players, because a lot of the power sits with the GM in that, whereas it's more balanced for the new school. So I think there's interesting stuff there. So let's just go to team new school first. So from your perspective, how do you think it's going so far, and which of your arguments do you think may have landed, and which do you think you want to develop more in your next two segments?
I mean, I think my immediate concern is Neil parking his tanks on our lawn by claiming every game that was done before the early 80s, no matter how narrative it was, plus all the new games that he thinks are quite gamist and quite good. So essentially, he appears to be defining old school as everything he likes.
Everything that's old. Everything that's old.
So, I mean, it is so much of this comes down to definition, I think, of exactly what it is we're saying, because I think everyone predicted this was going to be a problem. Because
is there everyone, Doc? I think it was you.
Okay, I predicted it loudly and frequently. Is that unless we could work out exactly what it is how we define both old school and new school, it's really difficult to be sure about which bit we're going for. And the risk is we just described our favorite games. I think you've done very well at saying, try and highlight the sort of aspects you really like. But I think in the second bit, I don't know whether we need to dive down and try and come up with examples, very specific examples of games we consider to be new school, and then why we think they're good.
Can we define that PBTA, my hate, is new school?
Very happy we'll take that. We're happy to take PBTA.
Yeah, because I absolutely hate it. By the way, does anybody want my Dungeon World copy?
Hang on. Right, so
I really think that PBTA is definitely new school, but also I want to see, can we define, because I've turned into a kind of Free League fanboy. So is everything from Free League new school or old school? That is a little bit of a kind of a grey area
by itself. I think,
it is.
Isn't it?
If we're debating that, we've got no lines. I mean, it's ridiculous. If you're thinking that a dice pool narrative-based system, all of which has been coming out in this century, is old school, then honestly, all we're doing is saying, I like this, therefore it is old school. I like this, therefore it is new school, depending on what team we're on.
And I would argue that Forbidden Lands is probably about, if you're going to talk about Jeopardy, Forbidden Lands, which is the Year Zero engine, is probably about as jeopardizing as you can get. In fact, it's driven players away from playing it because it can be so grim. Anyway, so the next speakers we've got up for, I'm going to come back to old school in a second. But the next speakers we've got for Team New School, so we've got Kat and Doc. So I think you've set your stall out there, Doc, in terms of what you think. What about the other team members of Team New School?
Well, this idea of having to define old school and new school sort of definitively fills me with horror because you just can't. Also, this has driven me onto the internet, and I've had a look at Wikipedia, like all really good academics do. And apparently the debate has been going on since 2004. So I doubt very much that we're going to be able to come to any conclusions during the time of this podcast. But I do think that the idea of trying to define some of the games that we think are old school or new school is a good way to illustrate our thoughts. And I guess that was one of the weaknesses of my opening gambit, is that I didn't actually mention any games specifically.
Well, there's always room for improvement, but I thought it was pretty strong as it was. I mean, I think, the beauty of this is that actually we're not going to come to a decision in this podcast, and we're not going to try and define it. Essentially, the listener and his friend, or her friend, or their friend, are going to vote on which group they make the most persuasive arguments from their perspective. So it's more subjective than that, I think. But that's okay. This is the internet. Whatever.
I specifically mentioned Questwells, which came out in 1989 or 1990, as an example of a game in which death is consensual, which is a very much a new school aspect. That game came out in the box. It was two books. It was 2 books and some dice in a box. The original. So it fulfills Neil's thing of being able to go and buy it in Games of Liverpool in a box. But it definitely, in terms of rules, it's definitely what we would consider to be a new school game.
I feel we have a convert, everybody. Andrew's come over to the dark side.
No, it's a new school game in a box.
But it's from an old school era.
Okay, come on, keep it clean, guys.
On as I said, I think Team New School is definitely of the opinion it's going to be very difficult to make a judgment of when, make the judgment of, oh, well, everything pre-Vampire must have been old school, because even in 85 and so, there were indie games or smaller games like in America, which were very much based on comedy and not on a crunchy rule set. There's several of them out there. I mean,
like Toon and that sort of thing, for example.
Yeah, or there was one, I think it was Alma Mater, which was you were playing kids in a magical school type setting. So you're playing archetypes like a jock, a nerd, cheerleader.
Shaking his head.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's not a magical school. Please, listeners, do not search for Alma Mater and buy it for your kids who love Harry Potter. It's a very different kind of game.
It's not that.
The point is that game was, I think, mid-80s. Now, that would definitely be technically old school, but it's not. It's more of a new school, what we term as new school. I think old school and new school definition really comes down to me personally, it comes down to the crunch. How many rules are there? And as I said, I don't think there's ever going to be a clean definition. But if someone says to you, it's an old school game, most of us think, great, it's going to have a battle map from the start, because there's going to be a battle, there's going to be a map. I've got to see how far my arrows or my gun or my little goblins can run in, or whatever it is. There's going to be a battle map, because for me, old school are games that are very much individuals on a battlefield. So it's taking the old wargaming, but now you're playing an individual. So for me, that's that line.
See, this is why we're not going down the route of defining old school versus new school, because I say, they've been arguing about it on the internet for like 20 years or something. And this is more about, why do you prefer games that are, so if we're saying new school enables a little bit more social interaction and perhaps in a more mechanistic way. It's more about that sort of thing, really.
Yeah, and I think new school, you have a preference to play. I think it all comes down to player preference. I know that the Neils definitely like
the Gestalt entity known as the Neils.
Like their rule set for that. Whereas I like the fact that with new school games, quite often you can ignore the rules. If the narrative, the story is really good and everyone's having fun with it and pushing the story on, you can ignore the rules. I know. I can almost see Dave clutching his pearls now at that point. But,
clutching something anyway. But, right. Okay.
Family show.
I didn't do anything.
Team old school, from your perspective, I mean, how do you think your arguments have been strong so far? Do you see any gaps, anything that you really want to emphasise in your next couple of segments? Sorry,
we are the party. We are the party of dogma.
Yeah.
No, I think. I mean, it's certainly the new school argument's persuasive, but I think there's like Kat saying there. In the new school game, you can ignore the rules or whatever. That's always been like a key thing. Certainly, like in OSR, ruling's not rules, so you don't. You just make stuff up as you go along. So that's a very old school approach. But it does seem to me like the definitions are, and going back to Doc's point, unless we can define, then what are we talking about really? Because to me, there's some games that are clearly old school. Old school, like it's in the name, isn't it? It's stuff that's old, right? So we can't say something's new school, but it was like not 80 years ago. It's really old. You can't say it was like came out in the 70s or the 80s, but it's new school, because it's not, because it's old. It came out in the olden days of 30 years ago. We somehow need to define what we're talking about, or I think maybe as Kay suggested, speak about specific games that we think are exemplars of what we consider new school.
Well, you guys are trying to appeal to, and I'm already seeing Phil the Dice Mechanic exploding on Twitter afterwards when he listens to
Always this. Good. I mean, that's a sub game in itself.
But I think it's more about you guys appealing to whoever listens to this rubbish to say, who's actually, I think given what they've said, new school sounds like a much more interesting way of playing, or old school, or the way that certainly the old school team have described old school. That's the one that I think has made the most compelling arguments about a more fun play experience. Because as you say, that's why I didn't say let's define old school, new school, because I just thought, you know what, life's too short. Team old school, are there any you think you need to double down on in the next bit?
From Tunnels and Trolls 5th edition, he says there's no right or wrong way to play, only suggestions. So we already had the freedom to do what we wanted. We could start with a set of rules and add our bits on, and you could even change the rules in the middle of a game if everyone was happy with that. But you always had that freedom there.
I think I'll quickly want to support Neil on that one as well, because I think it's either in the first or second edition, within the first 10 pages, I think it might have even been Gygax himself, and that he said, these rules are just a guideline. You play the way you want to play. And that I'm sure that was in the first edition, maybe, or second. But
referee.
Yeah.
They are defining
until the TSR lawyers got.
They are basically defining saying that old school is playing any game you want by any rules you want, which would appear to me to define role playing. So, I mean, again, they're grabbing everything.
Yeah, we were here first.
Madness, referee.
Johnny come lately.
As a new school person, just kind of say here that the irony of, invoking Gygax himself and having him tell you, as the ultimate GM godhead, that it's okay to play your own way, as opposed to having that built into the entire system from the beginning. And that's why I think that is a bit of a rubbish thing to say.
Okay, right, calm down.
Kiss and also boo. Yeah, can't invoke Gygax. And so, the godhead of games said it's okay to play however you wanted, and we are following exactly what he says. Yes.
Someone hold her back.
but that's always been a thing. I don't
keep that venom in. Keep that venom into the next section. Come on, right? Okay, this is great. This is clickbait. Arbiter Rick, any thoughts on the strength of the opinions being expressed here?
I think it's heating up nicely. I agree. The whole problem with what is old school and what's new school, I think it's that's kind of a bit. I understand you mean it's kind of fundamental, but also I think maybe it's a bit of a side issue, because it's one of those things where you know it when you see it, and I think maybe. Didn't want to say it, but I think it is a bit like that.
Tractor porn.
Let's move away from tractor porn, because but I think it is one of those things where I think you've got a good idea of what it is when you say it, when you see it, when something's new school and something's old school. There are some edge cases, some fringe cases, maybe, but I think we kind of know what we mean. So maybe we could work on that basis rather than starting to try and work out what old school and what new school is, simply because I've got stuff to do.
So again, it's about what play experience you like and what enables that, really, isn't it? So, okay, all right. So with that, we're moving to the second half now. Everyone will be glad to hear. So back to Team New School in this case. Who would like to get stuck into this bit?
I think it might be me, because then we have that very pleasing boy girl thing.
Oh, like that.
Symmetry is good. That's fine. Yeah,
So
okay.
so Doc now, is it?
You know what you're saying about me.
I regard that as a compliment.
That's such an old school thing to say, Dan.
It is.
Sick.
Sorry.
Okay, Kat, you're up.
Okay, the reason why I love new school games is the fact it allows for more fun, quirky characters. Yes, before the old school are going to say, but you could always have done that. Yes, you can, but the problem with that is that you wreck a party balance. And if you're wanting to multi-class and nobody else has, and the GM throws something that's suitable for nominally the party level, your quirky character is going to die. And that's happened a few times, which is why I think the old school, you tend to have either everyone goes quirky, which is very unusual, or you just end up with a very staid character. Whereas with new school, it's encouraged to be quirky. It's encouraged to find something that you want to play or explore in it. Which I really like. And also the fact we did have this conversation in the break. I'm hoping they keep it in, but there was the argument that they said that Gary Gygax said, you can ignore the rules if you like. It's your game. Like heck, has any old school table ever really done that? Because there'll be a lot of pearl clutching. The rules are there for a reason. We have to do the rules. There are house rules, I grant you, but a majority will never do that. And in fact, it's one of the most forgotten things. Whereas new school looked at that and went, that's beautiful. Let's make that our core thing. And they've done it beautifully. So within new school, I love the fact you can have fun without dice. You can literally go a whole session without rolling a dice, because if you've come up with a good idea, everyone's worked together, you've done the story narrative building towards it. There's no reason to roll dice and have death by dice. You instead can have a far more dramatic battle, with a couple of rolls, then just make a thing of, well, okay, normally it's all going well for your group. What do you want to do? You can have a dramatic ending. You can, car chase. You can have anything you want cinematically without wrecking it by a dice roll or opening that rule book. And that's what I love about new school, is that flexibility to have a cinematic ending without sort of coming up with all these things, and then one person rolls a 1 and it's all over. And that's why I find new school so much more fun to play. It's quirky. You get to explore a lot more, and you also, as long as everyone's having fun and that story's drawing together, you can have that cinematic ending without just death by dice, constantly rolling. I do this, roll a dice. You do that, roll a dice. Instead, it's a proper story. It's an interaction, which I think everyone can get behind. Even if you're not keen on doing acting, to put some quotation marks, you can still do it. As long as you're making an effort and everyone else appreciates that, it's good. Job's a good one. So, as I said, quirky characters for the win. New school.
So it seems as though you're saying that the space that's left in what we have very, very loosely categorised, let's not call it a definition, it's categories, as old school. Some of that narrative space in new school has been taken up by, there are mechanics in there which allow you, in terms of how your character is developed and fleshed out, that actually it defines your character more. Whereas in old school, let's say if you wanted to go into a complex social interaction, it would be, roll under your charisma or whatever it might be. In new school, there's a little bit more flesh to it. Is that where you're coming from? And you can have those characters that are a bit more.
There is. The problem is, as I say, with old school, like the roll your charisma, is that people just tended to rely on the dice roll quite often. I mean, it doesn't always happen that. Yes, it does depend on group. But when people are coming in and all they've got, their first experience of role playing is that book, they just think you have to make a roll, that's it. Whereas new school has always put it. Yes, you can make a dice roll, but you've still got to put some effort into it. Tell us what you're actually saying, how you're saying it.
It's more explicit maybe in terms of the rules. There's sort of a solid contribution there on behalf of New School, and a bit of clarity again about what it is from certainly from Kat's perspective. Okay, so over to Team Old School then. So who's in the ring next?
I'll go
You,
for it.
Fabi?
Okay, so that means we're going to have those in segments from Dave and Doc. Blimey, the bruises in the ring at the end. Anyway, right. Okay, so Fabio, you've got 3 minutes.
Hi, Fabio here. Just on Kay's argument about role-playing and not relying on dice. But I've known in situations where you've got new people, new to role-playing, and there's this shyness, and they're like, oh my God, I've got to role play this, and I've never played this game before. And I think the dice does give a path towards how that interaction happens. I mean, for myself, I played a PBTA game and I was really tired, and it was at the end of the day, and I was playing Scum and Villainy, and I'd been playing it on a weekly basis, and this was maybe a month or 2 months into the game, and suddenly the GM says, okay, the narrative is over to your character, Fabio. What are you going to do? And I just sat there and everybody's looking at me, and I've got to steer an entire story of where our characters are going, and I'm just like going, oh my God, I'm just too tired for this. I am literally too tired and too old to steer the whole narrative of the group and the story of where we're going. Are we going to steal that spaceship, or are we going to go to that planet, or are we going to attack that crime lord, or are we going to have a laser battle here? And I'm like, no, please, can I have some guidelines? And I've got a whole lot of points I want to say, so I'm going to quickly go through them. If it wasn't for OSE, New School wouldn't exist. Kay's going on about D&D. New School is a wider audience. Well, the widest audience is Dungeons and Dragons, and that was the first one. Why am I here? I'm here because of the Grognard files. Sorry, Steve, mentioned in another podcast, but the Grognard files are all wargaming, and it was all from, Grognards are all wargamers, and it was all from an old school, and that's why I started listening. It was old school, and I love the fact that it's also open to new school. Also old school, my nostalgia. I absolutely love the nostalgia. Your title, Orlanth is Gaming Vexes. Orlanth, stroke is RuneQuest. That's old school. Neil, because both Neils went on about combat. Well, Call of Cthulhu is investigative. I've played D&D. I've played a couple of games of D&D where it was no dice was rolled. We just role-played social situations without a single dice being rolled. And do I have anything else? Yes. Does anybody want to buy my Dungeon World? Thank you.
Thank you and good night. All right, cheers, Fabio. Thanks very much. I can hear there's a lot of passion behind it, especially as far as Scum and Villainy goes. I will say I have GM Scum and Villainy. Andrew, do you think that MechWarrior Destiny is a new school game or an old school game? What would you say?
So I would, based on the rules book for Destiny, I would say it was kind of a new school game, and there's a lot of sort of space left out for these kind of interactions. I think that's part of the issue with it. It doesn't actually suit the MechWarrior universe because it's too new school, and the MechWarrior universe, I think, would benefit from a sort of older school.
The reason for me asking was just because there are only 2 games that I've actually stopped playing and said I can't do this anymore. One is Scum and Villainy, and the other one was MechWarrior Destiny. But I think that was probably more about. Well, there's a whole podcast about that strange you can listen to. Anyway, okay, so that's that. So thanks very much
they're
for
both
that.
new school, aren't they, Steve?
Fabio. Okay, so we're on to final arguments. Let's go from New School. So I think Doc, it's over to you.
Let's go with Neil H's comment. You weren't there, man. I was there. I absolutely was. I was. I've had the player versus DM arguments. I've had the player PvP backstabbing. I've had mapping. I've even had caller and leader roles in the party. So, I've any old school fight you want to have, I'm happy to go for. I think, and you know what? I love that. I mean, the old school experience, it makes me remember gaming every day, 6 days a week during the school holidays, and grasping, the 2 hours of fun in every 12-hour session. With the rest of the time sitting there arguing about how many arrows we have and whether we'd run out of torches. But I look back at that. I think it's what the Grognard Files, it looks back at the absolute joy we had when we started role playing. And in some ways, if we define old school as what I did when I was a teenager, music was better, all sorts of things were better when we were teenagers. I think we've got to be careful.
We were better when we were teenagers.
I hope you're going to be adding an extra 5 seconds for the unnecessary interruption there, though completely accurate. But no, this is the thing. It's, what we're trying to do is sell a type of game, not just a time of your life here. And that's what I think we need to look at. And I would say the thing that really marks old school for me was, I think in some ways, the amount of GM power. The GM was in charge. The GM would, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson never used AD&D rules. I mean, it's a well-known fact. If you read any of the sessions, they used to make stuff up all the time. So, I mean, old school, it's certainly not, slavish adherence to the rules, unless the GM wants to. In which case it is slavish adherence to the rules, and there you go. I think Fabio described beautifully why he doesn't like narrative games. He's too old, he's too tired, he doesn't want to contribute. Sometimes we all want to just roll initiative and then roll to hit, and that's true. But new school games, the advantage of new school games is that everyone can contribute, everyone can add to the story. The games are individually designed for a particular experience. You can pick and choose from there. And then the rules will support you. We've had, 40 years of game tech to allow us to come up with, if we say we want a narrative game where everybody is contributing evenly, everyone is putting things together, you can, we have rules that let you do that. If you want to simulate the old school thing, you can go everything from Torchbearer to Old School Essentials. And Old School Essentials, given when it came out, the definition of a new school game.
Exactly on the 3 minutes, even with my 5-second interruption. So that's brilliant. Okay, thanks, Doc. Impassioned, I think, right at the end, and nicely balanced. So the first half of your argument was in the first 1.5 minutes. And it's almost like you've done this stuff before in terms of presenting in front of loads of people, like Kay. So we need to finish strong there, and so we've got Dave in. Dave, do you want to give the final arguments for Team Old School then? In that case,
well, firstly, thank you, Team New School, for rebutting everything about old school with old school games. Well done, well played. But what is OSE? I'm terribly sorry. I mean, old school. Well, it's a state of mind. We are all Neil, everybody. We are all Neil. It is Trick Tables. It's White Dwarf, an Imagine magazine. It's jumpers for goalposts. It's cultural appropriation. And yes, it may have had bigotry, thinly veiled, but it was there. It had death, frequent, horrible death, horrible death. And there was mayhem, chaos, and lawful evil. There was bad artwork. There was black and white layouts. There was character builds. There was point attributes. It is the Grognard Files and back in the day. It is Peter O'Brien and failing charisma checks. It's fail, not fail forwards. It's crayons on dice. It's basic role-playing and masks of Nyarlathotep. It is an ethos, a philosophy, a way of life. It's more than a feeling. It's sexual healing. It's huge spell lists, area of effect, and or descending armor class. It's lovely. It is poorly laid out. Come on, everyone. Let's go streaking.
Oh,
no. For listeners at home, Dave's just taken his shirt off.
Have I perhaps gone a bit far?
You've picked a bit soon, I'm afraid, there, mate.
Story of my life. All I would say is
I can't unsee it now.
I absolutely rebut the fact that Old School Essentials, and this will be the plank of my argument, Old School Essentials, one of the most popular recent games that we've had, re-released, it's simply reordered. It's therefore the beautiful Old School brought back to life, and the clue, everybody, is in the title. Old School Essentials. Thank you very much. I rest my case early. I'm just going to get dressed now. Sorry.
And that is going to be on record. So that's going to. I'm going to make a GIF out of that, and that's going to go on Twitter.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Just going to title that, Steve, Old School.
My word. That was terrifying and awe-inspiring at the same time. So yeah, thanks for that.
These
Right.
old school pants I've got on are chafing a bit now. I can tell you.
Rely on you, Dave. So so that was. I think that was. So it was quite a different style there to Doc's sort of. I mean, yours was very much appealing to the emotions and definitely sort of doubling down that whole nostalgia thing. And,
I genuinely believe, nakedness aside, I genuinely believe that actually old school is more of a sort of a state of mind. It's not a slavish adherence to anything. I think it's when you want to, you go old school. When you want to go new school, you go new school. I don't think there's any real difference, is there?
Fantastic.
Should we just stop the podcast there then?
I was going to go for closing comments from each group, but I think Doc, you'd already done it, and I think certainly David done something there at the
end. So, in podcast terms, I think I've soiled myself, and I'm shouting at the traffic from the War Memorial. But,
Brilliant. Okay, right.
That's nicely taking the focus off any kind of cheesy thing that I was going to do to round things off. So I can't top that. So yeah, go for it.
So I'll open it out to the group. So for Team New School, is there anything you want to add at the end there? So as your final appeal to the voter for his or their vote.
Other than put my clothes back on.
I was going to ask about docking points off of old school for that, but to be honest, I think everyone's put them up with some really good points for their side, and I think anyone who's listening, just go with your heart. Which way, which style do you want? And remember, when you click that little votey button, nobody else can see.
I will know, and Elon Musk would. Well, he would have known, but no. Okay. So any more closing points, or are we? I think we've pretty much done it there, guys.
I've just one idea while we're actually going through this. I was thinking about what they've said about it's more than a feeling, and we can't not think of that, Jim.
I'm gonna have that. That's going to be the lead.
Okay. So second thing, are we looking at something which is a lot like music? There's two different types of music. There's pop music and there's music. So, like, we're talking difference between Tavares and Pink Floyd, essentially. Now, the thing is, you can actually have both. You can enjoy both. Is old school essentials role-playing with proper tunes? Is that basically what old school is? And I think it's possible that it could well be that. And you've got the music, the skill, the craft, the enjoyment that comes with actually putting a dungeon together. And you've also got the quick pop hit that comes from the new school games. And I think the one question that's often asked, what is the best era for music? And the ultimate answer is it's always right now, because you've got all the old stuff you can still use, and it's sifted because you know what's good. And you've also got the new stuff, but there's always something in it that you can find and you can use. Best time for role playing is always right now.
To take that music analogy on just a little bit further, sometimes you want a bit of Marvin Gaye, and sometimes you want a bit of Ed Sheeran. You can take what you want from different things. Sometimes you simply don't like the Beatles, and that's okay. That's okay, everybody.
I'm objecting to Ed Sheeran as being like the poster child for new school at this point.
Okay.
The one thing that I really wanted to say, though, is that
Justin Bieber.
That we are a bunch of grognards, let's face it. The youngest person here is still over 30. She said kindly, and we're not going to say who that is. But what about all those new D&D players that Fabio mentioned? What's the future going to be for old school? How are they going to look at old school and new school? How is the next generation of grognards going to feel about both of these things? Because grognards, we are a diminishing group, and the baton will be passed on to a new generation soon. And how are they going to feel about what's old and what's new school?
But does that matter? As long as they're playing role-playing games, does it really matter?
Oh, no, I'm not saying that it's a question that has to be answered. I think it's just a question that has to be pondered and looked forward to, really. And
I think
just
so.
to see how they're going to debate it and whether there will be the Neil monolith in future generations as there is right now.
I think what's interesting is that sort of, because we talked about the definition of more definition about grognard, there's a difference between how it's seen in the States and I think this community, this group, we've got a different definition, and so we're bringing future grognards into the group already. We're always seeing new people come through, and we introduce them, say, which essentially is, to Dave's point, hey, just come and play games with us, whether it's having your head kicked in Forbidden Lands or something a little bit more open. I don't know, whatever that might be. Tales of Equestria or whatever. That's fine. It's all good.
It's more likely to be dying of not having any food or water in Forbidden Lands, isn't it?
Yeah. Falling over whilst trying to pull some ferns up and then dying. That's usually what happens. So
Is new old school.
New old school.
Maybe.
Wow. There you go. Cross the streams. So thanks very much, everybody. I say the listeners will decide. I think, as is typical, we started off with Vexes, and then we've all come together in a lovely big group hug at the end, which is nice, and exactly how it should be. So thanks very much for your time, everybody, and we'll see what the votes bring.
My school is have it your way. Your school is do what the DM say. My school is hero's journey. Your school is coroner's gurney. My school is young and woke. Your school is grognard joke. My school is complex story thread. Your school is one hit dead. My school is pools of sexy dice. Your school is roll d20 twice, then add your modifiers, roll a d8 for damage, calculate overall effect, check the lucky some additional modifiers, maybe a d4, calculate those again, check the rules real quick, then decide on countermeasures, hold an action for later, argue about the initiative order, see your character is dead, so pull another one out of the bag just to play for the next 20 minutes until the next one.
Thanks for listening to another exploration of my gaming vexes. If you've got any thoughts you'd like to add to what you've heard here, or a gaming vex of your own you'd like to offer up for discussion, you can contact me on Twitter @AllAnthar, or you can leave a voice message. The link's on the podcast webpage on Anchor, or can be found in the show notes. Until the next time, may all your games be free of vexatiousness, and be excellent to each other, always.